This small town full of hooded figures, glowing clouds, cryptically terrifying public policies, and flickering realities quickly feels more like home than home. There is nothing like Nightvale in the best possible way. Maureen Johnson. Hi guys, it's Lucy, and today I'm going to be doing a review of Welcome to Nightvale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. This will be a spoiler-free review, as it says in the title. I'm just going to get right into talking about the book. So, this book I have been talking about for months, and I want to say while this review is spoiler-free, I will be talking about the podcast, which, if you don't know, this book is based on a podcast also called Welcome to Nightvale. And so, in my review of this book, I will also be talking about the podcast, but there should not be any spoilers for either of those things, so yeah. No need to proceed with caution, proceed freely. So a brief synopsis of this book is that it is set in the desert community of Nightvale, which is basically a weird town. A lot of weird stuff happens there, and everyone just kind of proceeds like normal, because that is their normal. And it follows two characters, so it does have a dual point of view, but it is told in the third person, but it's 2 points of view. The first protagonist is Jackie, who is a 19-year-old who runs a pawn shop in Nightvale. And by a pawn shop, I mean the pawn shop. The only pawn shop in Nightvale. And she has a daily routine of going to the store, opening up the store, taking customers, leaving the store, going home. And that's her routine. She's been living this life for a long, long time. And one day, a customer from the pawn shop is a man in a tan jacket, and he gives her a piece of paper with the words King City on it, and she is unable to let go of it, and this one visit ruins her routine that she's been living for many years. Our second protagonist is Diane Creighton, who is the mother of a 15-year-old shapeshifter. He is just like any other teenage boy who can also turn into a tarantula at any given moment. Something strange happens, and she's just trying to communicate with her son. Basically, that's all she wants. Diane starts seeing her son's father everywhere, and then her son is also starting to question, as probably most teenagers who have single parents, where his father is and who was his father. And throughout this novel, it follows Diane and Jackie's adventures after this man in the tan jacket comes and sees Jackie, and Diane starts seeing her son's father everywhere. And then somehow, through King City, they are connected and their paths cross, and the book just follows them trying to solve their issues. Before I get into how I felt about this book, I just want to give a disclaimer, or not how I felt, because I love this book. I give it 5 stars. I loved it just as much as I expected to love it. But my little disclaimer is that this book is weird, as is the whole Welcome to Nightvale universe, Nightvale town. As I said, Nightvale is a weird town. There's secret police who everyone's aware of. There's a faceless old woman who secretly lives in your home. And there are angels, all named Erica. So, yeah, this book is pretty weird. If none of that appeals to you, then I am sad to say that I cannot recommend this book. I really recommend listening to 1 episode of the podcast and seeing how you feel. Actually, 2 episodes, because the second episode is a lot of fun. I'm just saying. But I also do recommend that because the podcast is less of a time investment and a money investment. The podcasts are free. This book was not, but it was worth every penny. So yeah, that was my little disclaimer for this book. I still loved it, and if you at all think that you will like it, I definitely recommend picking it up, because I do think this is for most audiences. It is categorized as sci-fi, I think, funny sci-fi, which I never really thought about it like that, but it definitely rings true. And I've also seen it compared to A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I have not yet read. It is on my TBR eventually. But from what I know about it, I feel like it is a good comparison, but I could be lying because I've never read it. Now on to all the things that I want to talk about this book. All the things that I liked, which was basically everything. First, I really enjoyed the characters. I liked learning about everyone who we got to learn about. I feel like all the characters were fleshed out enough for me and for what Nightvale is. If you are at all familiar with Nightvale, then you will know that sometimes the joke is that there is no punchline, and sometimes part of their characterization is that you know as little about them as possible. And so I feel like all the characters were well fleshed out, as well as they should be. I also felt that the plot was very well done. This is a standalone book, and it read like a standalone book, thank God. it didn't even feel open-ended enough to have a sequel. I feel like they could have a sequel if they wanted to, but it wouldn't be with this cast of characters, in my opinion, which I appreciate because I have said this before, but I really like standalones to just be standalones. I don't like when standalone books come out and then, like, a year later, 6 months later, they're like, oh, there's going to be a sequel. I hate that a lot. So yeah, I really appreciated that, and I felt like it was a complete arc, and I was always interested in what was going to happen next. I never felt really bored with anything that was going on, and I really enjoyed that. I will also say that this did read very much like the podcast, which I was worried that wouldn't translate as well in a book, but I was wrong to be worried. I thought it translated very well, but I will say that since it did read a lot like the podcast, I think in audiobook it would be really nice. It might be an even better reading experience. Not that this reading experience wasn't good, but I do want to get the audiobook eventually just to listen to it because it's basically like a 12-hour long podcast. And Cecil, who is the voice of Nightvale in the podcast, also records the audiobook. And so I think the audiobook would be a great experience. The last thing that I want to mention about this book is that I feel like there were a good amount of inside jokes made in the book to the podcast, or like references to the podcast that were made in the book. And while I definitely enjoyed them, like I chuckled or whatever, I can see how they might be perceived as annoying to anyone who has not listened to the podcast, which again, I do recommend you listen to like 1 or 2 episodes of the podcast before you read this, but you can definitely read this without listening to the podcast. Like, you just wouldn't get those specific jokes, but like nothing that was referenced from the podcast is integral to the story or plot in any way or shape or form. They're just like added into it, if that makes sense. That is basically my only caveat to this book. But again, as I said, you definitely do not have to listen to the podcast if you don't want to. But after reading this, I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to. Basically, to give an overall overview of everything that I said about this book, I 100% recommend it. I really enjoyed it. I think that anyone can like it. You should go into this book with the idea that nothing in it makes any sense, and it's okay. Like, that's how you should go into the book. That's how I feel if you haven't listened to the podcast. Like, a lot of stuff doesn't make sense, and like, even as a listener to the podcast, some things just don't make sense, but like, it's funny. Like, that's part of the funness in the book. Like, some things don't make sense. Like, why don't they pay attention to the secret police? Like, that doesn't really make sense, but it's fun. So you should go into the book with that idea in mind, and then I promise you will enjoy it. I think that is everything I had to say about this book. Again, I can't recommend this book any more than I already am. Like I said, read it like 10 times in this video. So again, read this book. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have read Welcome to Nightvale and want to discuss it down below, please leave a comment down below. And if you are putting a spoiler there, please like write spoilers on it so you don't spoil anyone else. And if you are interested in reading this book, I will have the Welcome to Nightvale website down below in case you have any interest in the podcast or anything like that. Again, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!